The organ had barely finished echoing when the first shot cracked through the chapel. Gasps froze the air. The bride, still clutching her bouquet, stumbled backward, crimson blooming against the white silk of her gown. Moments earlier she had whispered, "I do." Now she lay sprawled on the altar steps, her veil soaking in her own blood. The guests screamed, the groom collapsed, and the town split in two. Those who mourned her as a tragic victim, and those who whispered that justice, in its most brutal form, had finally arrived. This is the story of Clara Jennings, a woman whose wedding day became her funeral, and whose death blurred the line between tragedy and retribution. Clara Jennings was 31, sharp-eyed, and stunning in the way movie producers look for. A smile that made you trust her and eyes that made you doubt whether you should. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, the daughter of a retired firefighter and a schoolteacher. On paper, she was the kind of girl the Midwest loved to claim. At St. Matthew's Chapel, she looked the part. White lace gown, cascading veil, bouquet of lilies and roses. Her groom, Daniel Hale, an architect with a reputation as steady as oak, grinned like the luckiest man alive. Friends described their love story as storybook. They had met at a fundraiser for veterans, danced under fairy lights, and dated for 2 years. Daniel saw her as independent, fiery, and magnetic. What he didn't see, or perhaps didn't want to, was the darker current beneath her glow. For years, law enforcement had chased rumors of a secret society known as the Crimson Veil. Unlike the college fraternities or street gangs, the Veil operated in whispers, ritualistic killings of rivals, coded tattoos hidden in jewelry, meetings disguised as charity galas. Clara wasn't just a member, she was a rising star. Detectives later uncovered her name linked to at least 4 cold cases. A rival gang member shot in a parking garage, a whistleblower found drowned in a river, and 2 overdoses staged to look accidental. On surveillance footage too grainy for the courts but clear enough for insiders, Clara was there, always at the edges, always walking away. But before her wedding day, none of this had reached the public. To Dayton, Clara was Daniel's fiancée. To the Veil, she was an asset too valuable to lose. And to the handful of families who had buried loved ones under mysterious circumstances, she was the ghost they could never name. June 12, 2021, dawned hot and golden. Guests filled St. Matthew's Chapel, co-workers, neighbors, college friends, even the mayor. The service unfolded perfectly. Music swelled, vows were spoken, rings exchanged. When Father Brennan pronounced them husband and wife, applause shook the rafters. Daniel kissed his bride. Clara's smile glowed under the stained glass. And then, crack. A single gunshot echoed. Panic erupted. Clara staggered, dropping her bouquet. A red blossom spread across her chest, staining the lace. She gasped, eyes wide, and collapsed against the altar. Daniel screamed her name. Guests ducked under pews. The organist froze mid-note. By the time paramedics arrived, Clara Jennings was gone. News of the killing spread like wildfire. Bride shot on wedding altar. The image of her white gown soaked in blood became front-page news. The police launched a massive investigation. Was it a jealous ex? A spurned rival? A family feud? Everyone at the wedding was questioned. Security footage was combed. Anonymous tips flooded hotlines. To most, Clara's death was a heartbreaking injustice. What kind of monster kills a bride on her wedding day? But whispers began to circulate, first in hushed tones at coffee shops, then on local talk radio, and finally in headlines. Was the bride living a double life? Detective Marcus Green had been circling the Crimson Veil for years. When Clara's name surfaced, puzzle pieces clicked into place. Her death wasn't random, he told reporters. It was a reckoning. Investigators found a locked safe in her apartment. Inside, burner phones, cash, a ledger of coded entries, and a crimson scarf with a faint bloodstain. Forensics linked her to meetings with known Veil associates. Daniel was blindsided. She wasn't like that, he told the press, his voice breaking. She volunteered at shelters. She prayed before bed. But the truth was heavier than denial. Clara Jennings had lived 2 lives. One as a loving fiancée, another as a Veil enforcer, orchestrating violence with the same precision she planned her wedding seating chart. The investigation shifted. Who would want Clara dead? Rival gangs? Several believed Clara had crossed dangerous lines, eliminating competitors too boldly. Her execution on the altar could have been a message. Families of victims? Parents who had buried children whispered about justice. Maybe God used someone's hand, one grieving mother said. The veil itself? Cults protect themselves. Had Clara become a liability? Was her wedding, so public and so polished, too much exposure? Each lead spiraled deeper into suspicion. 3 weeks after the funeral, a bombshell dropped. Daniel Hale wasn't as blind as he appeared. In a hidden email chain retrieved from Clara's laptop, Daniel had written to an anonymous contact. She says the past is behind her, but I see shadows. If anything happens, know that I tried to save her. It became clear Daniel had grown suspicious in the months before the wedding. Clara's late nights, vague explanations, sudden bursts of cash, he had noticed. He had confided in a priest and possibly in law enforcement. Did Clara's own groom have a hand in her fate? The public turned on him. Talk shows debated. Was Daniel a victim or an accomplice? Detective Green received an anonymous tip. Check the balcony of St. Matthew's. Hidden in the rafters above the altar, forensic teams discovered a shell casing and residue consistent with a rifle. The shot had been fired from inside the church, not from outside as first believed. Whoever had pulled the trigger had planned meticulously, entering before the ceremony, waiting unseen, and escaping amid chaos. A fingerprint smudge led investigators to Ethan Ward, a former Veil member who had turned informant years earlier. He had vanished from witness protection 6 months before the wedding. Ward's motive? Revenge. Clara had orchestrated the murder of his younger brother during a botched initiation ritual. Ward had sworn she would never walk free. Ethan Ward was arrested in a motel outside Columbus. In court, he made no apologies. She killed my brother, he said flatly. The law never touched her, so I did what the law couldn't. The courtroom divided. Some saw him as a murderer who desecrated a sacred space. Others called him an avenger, delivering justice when the system failed. Daniel sat in the gallery, pale and hollow. He testified to Clara's double life, admitting his suspicions but denying any role in the shooting. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Their verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Ethan Ward was sentenced to 25 years. Dayton was left wrestling with itself. At Clara's graveside, mourners wept as if innocence had been stolen. Yet across town, the families of Veil victims left flowers of relief, whispering that maybe, finally, justice had found a way. Editorials clashed. No woman deserves to be murdered on her wedding day. Evil wears white dresses too. The case became a touchstone in debates about vigilantism, justice, and the shadows ordinary lives can hide. Years later, Detective Green reflected on the case. Clara Jennings lived 2 lives. One fed on power, on blood, on fear. The other fooled people into seeing her as a victim. But life has a way of balancing scales. She thought she could outrun her past. She couldn't. None of us can. The plaque at St. Matthew's bears no mention of the wedding. Only the date is carved into the marble, June 12, 2021, a day when vows and violence collided on the altar. To some, it's a scar of injustice. To others, it's proof that nature does not forget. Murdered on the Altar is more than a story of a wedding gone wrong. It's a reminder that the lives we live in secret shape the deaths we meet in public. Clara Jennings believed she could wear white and bury red. But the past has a way of showing up, sometimes in the most sacred of places. Justice isn't always clean, and it isn't always kind. But it comes. And when it does, it often comes on the altar. If this story touched you, subscribe, share, and like for more life-changing stories.